How's it going, everybody? Jordan here, and in today's video I'm going to go over my new samurai build, which you guys voted for and have been asking me about a lot in my direct messages. This build doesn't rely on elemental damage but can still one-shot enemies with your katana and as an assassin. This build has become one of my favorites, and I'll go over all the details and show you the transmog in this video. As always, if you could leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it or found it helpful, and join our Discord community if you have any questions, or you can tweet your questions at me as well. Let's get right into it. This samurai build uses all default gear from the original game except for one helix weapon engraving from the Nemean Claw. This engraving is the 30% damage while at full health perk. I found this perk to be extremely valuable with this build as the 30% damage applies to your sword hits and your assassinations, all without needing to use elemental damage. The other item that this build technically uses from the Helix store is the Blade of the Ethereal, which is the most katana looking sword in the game, but sadly it's from the Helix store and it's from the weapon on the Celestial set, so you'll have to get that if you want to have your sword look like this. With this build, you can assassinate mercenaries with one shot using critical assassinate and quickly get rid of them using the charged heavy attack with the sword. The combo of using the charged heavy attack plus critting with this build makes you feel as strong as an elemental build but without any of the elemental damage. Add in the fact that this build has a 100% chance to ignore half damage, so basically a 50% damage reduction, and you won't have to worry about dying unless you make a lot of mistakes. And this build also has a 100% crit chance, which is where all of its damage comes from. Samurais were known for their parry, so I had planned to utilize the 50% damage after parry legendary perk with this build amongst the other parry perks like the cooldown reduction and health, and I played around with those, but I realized that those are better as masteries than as perks and chose to go with the 25% damage to elites and bosses legendary perk, which also applies to assassinations and melee hits. Although if you choose to swap in the 50% damage after parry perk instead of that one, you'll deal a lot of damage when you play patiently and parry well. The other really cool idea is to use the 10% cooldown after parry on abilities. This will allow you to bring your hero strike back, so if you want to play a way where you're constantly parrying and relying on hero strike to kill enemies, you can do that also. You just gotta swap it out for the 25% damage to elites and bosses perk. Alright, let's get into the details. As you can see, this is all epic gear again. Thankfully to the smart loot system, you can wear gear similar to the ones that I'm going to showcase, or as close as you can get, and you'll be able to get drops that are much more like it. So we're going to have two identical swords here. We're going to have ones that have warrior damage, crit damage, damage with swords, but the difference is on the first weapon we're going to engrave that 30% damage while at full health perk, and on the second weapon we're going to engrave the 25% damage on elites and bosses. Again, you can swap in the damage after parry or cooldown after parry here. I wouldn't recommend the heal after parry because you can easily get that with masteries and not have to sacrifice a whole perk for it. For the bow, we're putting assassin damage, 10% crit chance, and warrior damage. You're going to see this on a few items where you would typically put elemental damage. What I went ahead and did was put assassin damage in and then sneak in some warrior damage so that we can have an even boosted assassin damage with this build, which makes it a very solid hybrid warrior assassin build, which I think is really fun to play. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and engrave the 50% melee charging speed. This allows us to quickly charge up our sword and hit people very hard. For the head, you're going to want to have warrior damage, chance to ignore half damage, crit chance at full health, and then damage with swords. This is where a lot of your damage and crit comes from, and it's the only place you can put chance to ignore half damage on this build, that and the waist. For the gauntlets, we have warrior damage, crit chance, and then crit damage while at full health. You can get any variation of these three perks and engrave the one that you don't have, but this is very common for a lot of crit builds, is these types of gauntlets. If you can just get one that has warrior damage, assassin, and hunter, you'll have the three best gauntlets you could probably have in the whole game and not have to worry about any other ones. For the chest, again, like the bow, we're doing this. We have an assassin damage primary perk, crit damage, and then warrior damage, And then I'm engraving the 15% all resistances here just for a boost in tankiness, but this isn't needed. So if you don't have this exact piece of gear, you can do assassin damage, crit damage, and health or armor or something else there, and then engrave the warrior damage or more assassin damage here. It's definitely very possible to do that as well. For the waist, we have warrior damage, crit damage at full health, crit chance, and then we have our last 40% chance to ignore half damage. And then finally on our boots, just like the bow and the chest, we have assassin damage, crit chance at full health, crit damage at full health, and then we engrave the warrior damage. Alright, let's look at the abilities for this. We only have one ability wheel, and I use 4 main abilities. The first is going to be Hero Strike. Because of that assassin damage and the way it works as a samurai, it's a really useful interruption and damage dealer, and it can kill mercenaries, elites very quickly. Our secondary ability is going to be Slow Time. Samurais were very well known for their speed of attack, but you can't speed yourself up in the game, so the equivalent would be as if you could slow things down and quickly kill or take out the people that you need to. Our third ability is the Chronos Time Shift from the DLC. I really like playing with this one. This is not necessary. It's really fun to jump up and slam down, but even the standard Vanish ability works as well for a samurai, or you could swap in the Shield Breaker ability if you're having difficulties with people with shields, but you can easily open shield enemies up to an attack with a charged heavy attack as well. And then lastly, I use Ares Last Breath. In case you take some damage and need to get some health back, you can use this, or you can also again use the original health back ability and not the DLC one. Lastly, you're going to want to put points into all the passives like Weapons Master, Gear Master, Shadow Assassin, and Charged Heavy Attack, because that's a very big damage dealing part of this element. And then obviously the overpowered attacks help out tremendously, especially against mythical creatures. Alright, let's look at the masteries. Again, if you don't have as many points as I do, just focus on the first ones that we need to put on. If you put 20 points into crit chance on the hunter side, 20 points into crit chance while at full health on the assassin side, you'll have 100% crit chance at full health. Lastly, you put 20 more points into chance to ignore half damage, and what you'll get is the 100% chance to ignore half damage as well. After that, you're going to want to put points into damage with swords, crit damage at full health, damage at full health, and damage on elites and bosses. This again will help tremendously with your melee hits and all your assassinations. On the warrior side of things, if you have the extra points, putting them into health, armor, and melee resistance will also help, as well as damage per enemy engaged for your conquest battles. As you can see here, we get 8% health restored on successful parry with just 12 points, while the legendary perk is 10%. That's why I don't suggest using that legendary perk, because you can basically just get it with 12 points. And then we have the 16% damage after parry with a few points as well. This is not the same as the 50% damage, but I still find it pretty useful. The one that I would want to use is probably the cooldown with parry, because that is something that is very unique and can bring your hero strikes back very quickly. And then lastly, if you have the extra points, putting them into crit damage on the hunter side will also increase your overall damage with everything you do. Alright, let's look at the stats for this build. Again, we have 100% crit chance at full health, and when we are critting, we're dealing 667% damage, stacked with 117% damage with swords, plus the 150% charged heavy attack damage, and as you can see, you'll be dealing a significant amount of charged heavy attack damage, even with no elemental modifiers. Next, on our defensive modifiers, as you can see here, we have 100% chance to ignore half damage, which is a complete 50% damage reduction. On top of that, we have a pretty high armor boost, some melee resistance, and range resistance, which makes this build pretty tanky on Nightmare and definitely can take lots of hits. The last thing to look at is because of that finagling of assassin and warrior damage on a few elements like the boots, the chest, and the bow, we were able to sneak in a lot more assassin damage, making this build really fun to play because it's not just a warrior build, but it can also assassinate a lot of enemies very quickly. Alright, finally the cool part. Let's go over the transmog for this build. So obviously the sword, we're going to be using the Blade of the Ethereal. It's in a Helix store item. It's the Celestial set, it's the Celestial sword, and that's where you're going to get this visualization. For the head, because it's super rare and people are actually struggling to find it, I really enjoy the Thalea's Overprotective hat, which was a weird update they did where they introduced a weird sunburn legendary perk which isn't in the game, but apparently you can't get the sun hat in the blacksmiths anymore, but I've heard you can, so there's a lot of confusion around it. But I happen to get it, so I'm using it. But if you don't have it, you can always use something like a hood, or even like a crown, or even go without any of it. The other one that is interesting to me is one like this, because this is kind of a little samurai-ish, especially with the Persian chest, but at the end of the day, if you have the sun hat, you gotta use the sun hat with this build. For the gauntlets, we have the Ancient King's gauntlets. It's the dark variation with the red on it. For the chest, we're using this dark neck variation of the Persian warrior armor. There are lighter versions. I prefer this dark version personally. For the waist, we're using the light version of the Ancient King's waistband. It gives you this red ribbon which matches well with the red and then the red on your boots and kind of ties it all together really well. And then lastly, we're using the Ancient King's boots on the bottom, the dark variation as well with this red and dark kind of outfit. Overall, giving it, I think, a really cool, very fun samurai look to it, and it's a lot of fun to play. So that's the samurai build. A lot of you were really ecstatic about it. I showed it in a live stream a few weeks ago, and I was refining it and tweaking it, so sorry if this is a bit later than you anticipated to see this. I just wanted to kind of really tweak it because it's been one of my more favorite builds to play. Also, if you like to get ahead of things or watch these builds or as I make them, I live stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on Twitch and on YouTube currently. I plan to completely switch over to Twitch within the next month or so, but for now, while my computer can still take it, we're going to be streaming to both platforms, and I respond to both chat rooms currently. But you can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/itsJordanDoes, and you'll be able to follow me there and join me. Right now, we're actually doing a really cool community interactive thing where I restarted the whole game from scratch, not a new game plus, but an entirely fresh save, and every time I die, I have to dismantle all of my gear that I'm currently wearing. It's proving to be an incredibly hard challenge. It's pretty funny, but I really enjoy it, and the chat is really enjoying it as well. And if you'd like to participate and come hang out with me, you can do that as well. So thanks again for watching. I appreciate all of you. If you have your questions or any other build ideas, please feel free to leave them in the comments or join our Discord community, or you can tweet them at me as well. Again, I appreciate all of you, and I'll see you guys next time. So proud.